Welcome to Cover Book Beat. I'm your host, Roger Nichols. Our guest this morning, ever since she was in the fourth grade back in about 1960, about the time I was in, Amy Pollack was writing and telling stories about a character named Jelly Bean. She never
Mm.
stopped telling those stories, sharing them with her students over a teaching career that spanned 40 plus years, shared them with her three children when they were younger, and then with her seven grandchildren. Now her stories have been made available to everyone with a recent publishing of two coming-of-age books intended for middle-aged graders, The Adventures of Jelly Bean and The Further Adventures of Jelly Bean. They chronicle the ups and downs of Jillian Bonnie, known to the world as Jelly Bean, and her struggle with friendships and being the youngest child with three older brothers. Her parents don't approve of her favorite friend in the whole world. She has trouble getting along with the brother who's closest in age to her, the uncle she loves is about to marry the most awful woman she could ever imagine, and the girl who used to be her best friend has turned on her. We're very pleased to welcome the chronicler of all this angst, author Amy Pollack. Welcome.
Hi.
Now,
Thank you, Roger.
one of the questions I often start with is, were you always going to be a writer? Well, apparently you always were. The
Mhm.
question is then, was there a single event or a series of events that said, time to pack these up and send them off to a publisher?
Oh, interesting. Okay, so what happened was finally, um, my mother-in-law, of all people, who may she rest in peace, but was a very critical type of person, would always say to me, "Whatever happened to your children's stories? They were so good." And coming from her, that was a major compliment because she didn't give them very easily, very frequently. And so, I started thinking, okay, maybe I ought to do that. That was a number of years ago. And then during the pandemic, when you couldn't do much of anything, you were kind of stuck home. So my silver lining, as awful as the pandemic was on for many reasons, I had a choice between either sitting down, finishing these and sending them off, or, cleaning my closets, which who really feels like doing that?
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it all transpired.
So now you've got published books, but dirty closets. It's this choice we all make in life. It's the give and take. Was it an easy job finding a publisher, or did they leap right on it?
Oh, interesting. So, as many people will tell you, and I knew my books were pretty well liked. Every
Mhm.
class I read them to, just a lot of people responded to them. But at the same point, my cousin's daughter, Ariel, thank you, told me how to send them around. Like you needed a one pager. So I
Mhm.
said, "Oh, I have an introductory thing. It's a little over." No, she said, "You have to do one." She was in the industry, so she
Uh-huh.
knew these things to tell me. Now, I did get about, I want to say, 25 rejections, which is fairly the norm. And then someone, Austin Macaulay Publishers, did take them, and I reread it a few times because I thought, wow, like this is very surreal. And I was talking to my daughter at the time and I said, "Do you think one of my friends is just teasing me?" And she said, "Mom, no, that sounds legitimate." And I gave them to them and that was it.
Oh, fantastic. So when did they come out? Are they just recently or
That's pretty recent. Yeah, this came out and I just sent my new publisher actually has my book three. So these two came out in, let's see, copyright 2022.
okay.
Uh-huh. And then the other one was like 6 months afterwards, the Further
Okay.
Adventures of Jelly Bean. I'm not that creative with my titles. I
Well,
try.
so the next one will be what? Son of the Valley of yeah, Jelly Bean, whatever the next one is. The
It's
the quickening.
actually it's called The Still Further Adventures. I know.
I love it. But it's all branding. Once you're part of branding, you need to have that jelly bean in every title. You know that.
No, you're right.
Yeah.
True, true, true.
So what's your writing schedule like? I mean, everybody has, are you a pantser or a plotter, as they say?
totally pantser. I'm terrible. I mean, I've taught writing so much, and now I give presentations in all the schools. I go everywhere, and I love talking to the kids, the middle grade, that is like the
Mhm,
preteens, which are my books are for ages 7 to 12, pretty much.
mhm.
And I'll always say I try to get myself to outline. I try very hard. I'm not very good at it. I recommend it, sort of like do as I say, not as I do,
Yeah.
because my characters kind of take me along with them and I do what they tell me to do. That's kind of what happens with me.
And that's interesting. About half the authors I talk to say that I start writing and the character tells me, no, I wouldn't do that. And so you
You
change.
know.
And so that's obviously something that's happened to you.
Hmm.
How much of this is real life? How many of these are people that if they were in your classes might be able to identify as sources for some of this?
Oh, definitely. Like I've talked to my daughter a lot about this when I'm up to a certain point and not exactly sure which way to go, and my oldest granddaughter. And now my second oldest granddaughter is extremely helpful. And they'll give me ideas like at the point where I'm not sure, well, spoiler alert, how much you read of my stories, but there's a point where her parents, Jelly Bean's parents, won't let her go over the
To her
friend
friend's
that
house.
she
Yeah,
okay, her favorite person in the whole world. She
yeah,
loves this girl. She's been a loyal friend, but she's from the wrong side of the tracks.
yeah.
And these situations, I really do deal with real life situations. And I'd said to my daughter at the time, I don't know what she should do. What would you do? 2 seconds. She goes, that's easy. I'd sneak. I was like, oh boy. Okay. All right. There we go.
Mhm.
They're very real life situations. Yes.
Right,
All.
right. And one of the things I find interesting is that the adults are complex characters as well in this. They're not
Mhm.
cardboard adults, as often is the case, or sometimes is the case with middle book writing.
I know.
You have an uncle who's going through some troubles at the same time, and both the parents seem like real 3D people. How much are you modeling those on you and your husband?
Oh, that's funny. It's somewhat mostly I was so blessed. I had this idyllic childhood. I had these my parents are long gone, but I had these wonderful parents, and this is my way kind of to recreate them. And they weren't perfect, but now being a parent and a grandparent, I a lot is in there that you kind of pinpointed. You try your best, most of us as
Mhm.
parents, and like I say to, well, it's that line from Our Town. I've said to my kids when they've criticized me for this or that, I apologize for the flaws in my character. And my characters, I think that's what a lot of people respond to. They are real life. They are. Most parents, many, if not most, are busy with their other children, with their careers, with their jobs, with their own whatever they have going on.
Yeah.
And I know my daughter, now that she has little ones, will say to me, I never remember you playing on the floor with us, like I will with my grandchildren now. And I said, you're right. I didn't. I didn't have time. I was driving someone somewhere, making dinner, doing chores. I was in school. I was working. That's a lot. Parents are pulled in many directions.
Absolutely. I think that comes through very, very clearly here. And again, this doesn't make them bad people. It just makes
No,
them, it's a part of life you have to deal with.
they're
I think
just real.
there's an interesting dynamic with her brother Sam
Hmm.
a little bit. In the beginning, at least of the first book, they're pretty close, and he will sometimes give advice to her,
Hmm.
and she accepts it because it's from somebody her age, and whereas adults are like can't figure them out at this point. I mean,
Yes.
there's one point where her friend Brittany says to her, your dad's cool. And he says, he's just my dad. She never thought of him as cool. And that was a funny thought. And that's interesting because this is the time when you start realizing some things that you take for granted and start thinking, okay, maybe they aren't, maybe they're just my perceptions as I get more knowledgeable.
Exactly. Because my dad was such a great guy and always managed to have time for us. And you take so much for granted when you're younger. And now I see how difficult that is. Like he would always come up and he always, well, when I was younger, read to me. He was always interested in my homework and friends. And then I'd go over other people's houses, or friends of mine would talk to me about their various situations. And I remember being so surprised that they were very dissimilar. You do take it for granted when you're younger.
That everybody's having the same experience as you are. Yes, and that's
Yeah,
not very much not the case. I mean, in the first book, at least, she visits some people and says their parents are not like my parents. They don't do the same things.
yeah.
So, and again, this is part of the coming of age movement is to learn and start to recognize some of these things and start to put them into practice. So,
Mm-hmm. Because it's all based on things that happened in my life or my children's life. Like I remember going over I had one friend in seventh grade, and I remember her saying to her mother, I remember being in shock, and she just said to her mother, just shut up. And
oh,
in my house, okay, you wouldn't have lived to tell the tale. I mean,
yeah,
I had wonderful parents, but they did not. They had certain guideposts, and you better
yeah,
follow them or you would have some sort of a punishment, not draconian, but enough so
yeah,
you knew that was wrong. And this girl's mother just took it.
yeah.
And I remember being in shock.
Yeah, that's that. Some things I can remember some stuff in my childhood. I think we've all discovered some things like that about
Hmm.
our friends. But I want to talk a little bit about your style. Most of the all of the stuff for young writers says find your style. I think you found your style many years ago, and you
I
just are
did.
expanding it. It's a very clean, transparent. You're not. It doesn't call us attention to itself. It doesn't say, "Hey, look how clever I am here." It just
Mhm.
conveys the stuff and becomes very transparent. And I think that's a real plus for your work.
Oh, thank you. Probably from just being a very wide reader,
Mhm.
because you sort of assimilate certain styles that you find appealing. Well, speaking for myself, and thank you, but I think it is preferable to be lay it out there, and it's just resonates more with the reader.
When fans ask you, who's on your bookshelf? Who do you read for fun? What do you
Oh
answer?
boy, I'm a very eclectic reader. I love the classics. My father read to me all Dickens. I read, and then I finished them up myself between the ages of 9 and 16. And I know that's not a very, not a very current preference for a lot of people. I love Madame Bovary. I could read that once a year. I love a lot of modern authors also because I'm in a book club and I'm always suggesting books to everyone, but I'm pretty picky. I love a lot of the Russian authors,
Mhm.
and I loved Anna Karenina. And wow, I just like so many. And I read to my daughter, well, I read to my all my children. I love Treasure Island. I love Robert Louis Stevenson. I read to her the Anne of Green Gables series,
Mhm.
and I could go on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Obviously, that is the case. But how much of your desire to share this with people is involved with trying to instruct them and kind of warn them about some of the situations that take place, or is this more just I want to chronicle this for the fun of it?
Oh, that's interesting. I guess that does creep in there. One, like when she has the anorexic friend, I don't want to give too much away, but and she helps her instead of taking her place in the gym meet.
Yeah.
And so much of life is choices. And I guess that's why, I mean, I was kind of surprised because here she started as a way back when as a mischievous character, and she was fun, and every people from my fourth grade remember it, my getting up there and telling these stories in my class because my teacher would call me up when she had downtime, and I would, tell these stories off the top of my head. And now in the reviews that I get, people say she's a real role model. So I'm happy about that, but she didn't begin that way. So I guess there is some sort of lesson, um, whether conscious or not, in and loyalty to a friend.
Mhm. Yeah. And what's the
She's
best? Yeah, go ahead.
she sticks up for the underdog. I like that about her. It's
Yeah.
kind of evolved.
Yeah. And that's tough sometimes to go against the popular girls
Very,
and
very
and
tough.
and and to set that out and say, I don't need your affirmation. I could deal with it myself. So there's all
Very
kinds
hard.
of this stuff in here. In fact, I just was thinking about all you were talking about all the authors, and I think one of my favorite quotes lately is, "Of course you don't have enough shelves for your books. If you did, you wouldn't be worth knowing." So
Oh, that's good. Well,
yeah,
now I use a Kindle a lot, so
yeah. You can
that
put
helps.
all hundreds of books with you in one little tablet. Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, I love biographies also.
Ah, yeah. Who have
Mm.
you read lately that you really appreciate?
Oh, well, along the lines of biography, I love Mornings on Horseback about Theodore Roosevelt. And then one of my sons had recommended to me, it was a book about Herbert Hoover, who, we never thought very highly of him because he had done so many bad things back in the day for the
Mhm.
country. And then he said, "No, you have to read this. You're going to be surprised. He did had all these good sides to him. Like you're saying, people are multifaceted." And I read that on his recommendation, and I was like, wow, you're right. Reading about the presidents is really, really fascinating.
I was lucky enough. I had a teacher in high school that says, memorize the presidents. You can hang all the history on which presidential administration was in charge, and it
Mhm.
has to this day. I could, yeah, still do that because it's very helpful.
I
Uh,
know, agree.
yeah. What do you hope people will take away from this when they close the books? They take away, what do you think they're taking away with them?
So it's kind of interesting because I was discussing, because as I said, I do all these presentations. I'm going to be at one of the libraries later and I go to classrooms and all. And in discussing these with people, what I have found that most people seem to say in one way or another is, okay, along the lines of my characters being multifaceted, is that my books, they're not as simple as they seem on the surface and they make you think.
Ah, and that's exactly the way I came away from it. So I'm pleased that
Really?
I got what you were throwing down, as they say. Yeah, yeah.
Because in life, there are no easy answers.
No, you
And
have. It's not a conflict between good and bad. It's conflict with two things that are bad. One maybe a little bit worse than the other. How do you pick?
so true. So
Yeah.
true. Like when her older brother wants to, or actually does, drop out of high school. And then for him, it's the correct decision to go join the Marines. Now, that's not an easy thing to have happen in a household because, and having taught high school and college, you see all these situations that occur because often the parents, well, generally speaking, want their children to finish high school. That's for sure. And about, joining the armed forces, that's not in every parent's um wheelhouse, whether they would choose this.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff to bring up and to deal with. Do you have, you mentioned how your daughters, your granddaughters are helping out now. Are they your first readers?
Oh, they do read things pretty early on. And then I will run some things by them, not all, but some. And sometimes I do like to get an opinion from a younger person because they're, of course, a little more in touch with what goes on in the world these days and not so much a 71-year-old. So,
Yeah. Well, I have to ask, this is one thing I always like to ask authors that are planning on a multiple series. Obviously, you've got two out, one on the way. Do you have the last scene of the last book already written in your head?
oh, ah, that's a good question. I mean, I do need her, and I get asked this a lot, to grow up.
Mhm.
But as I said, I really love that Anna Green Gables and the taking it through the different stages in her life. But I'm not exactly sure what's gonna be
Mhm.
with that. I know my husband's not crazy about that. He's a big dog lover, crazy about the idea of having her dog who she loves, pass away. It's gonna have to happen at some point, not at the very end, but somewhere
Yeah.
along the line.
Yeah. Great name for the dog, by the way. That's where did that come
Yeah.
from?
It just popped out of my head. I'm telling you, I could give you a laundry list of plenty of things I can't do very well,
Yeah.
but I do have this vivid imagination, and these ideas I mean, usually based on like a conversation I'll overhear, or a news item, let's say, or
Mhm.
something one of my children or one of the students, the child's the father of the man,
Oh yeah.
on something that one of them will mention. But as for the name, I don't know, it just kind of popped out of my head. Seriously.
Yeah. Well, Roger Over, almost there's a couple of scenes in Airplane where they do what's the vector Victor, you know, for some reason that reminded me of that. Just a
Right,
little.
right. That's
Yeah.
funny. Yeah.
Yeah. So I get the feeling that you, as you sit down at the keyboard to right off the top of your head, spend a lot of time chuckling to yourself as things come out. You go, oh, that's
Yeah,
good. That's fun. Yes.
I do. But I also get frustrated sometimes. Like
Mhm.
sometimes I'll write. And I'm from a family of writers, and my dad would say, if I was kind of stuck, you just have to move your hand across the page. And sometimes, like the next day, I'll come back and I'll be, oh God, this is awful. And that hardly produces a chuckle, but there are other times when, yes, sometimes that does. But then it's so hard. Having taught so much about teaching
Mhm.
writing, I sort of know these other tricks of the trade. Like you do have to, as difficult as it is, be ruthless with yourself and
Oh yeah.
just cut out whatever
You gotta
you
kill
may
your
think it,
babies. Yeah.
you may think it's such a wonderful piece of writing, but then you have to sometimes say, no, it doesn't belong here. It's not working.
Is it advancing the plot or not? Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have favorite characters we're going to see more of in as you go along? More of the family or more of other people coming into it?
Mm. I'm not sure. Like I do love Brittany so much. And I can't eliminate her. She has to somehow, I'm not exactly sure how, but they have to kind of join up again. I can't just not have her in anymore. And I do have to uh hmm think more about her uncle, and her uncle does end up, I guess this is in my book 3, he does end up marrying someone very nice that she likes and
Oh, good.
confides in.
Oh,
I
good.
know. Yeah, these are a lot based on real life situations. You
Well,
always kind of hope that's going to happen when you
yeah,
get a new family member.
yeah. I hope it's going to be compatible. Yep, they will fit in.
Right.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that just feel that resonate. I mean, it's been a long, long time since I was in the fourth grade, and I was never kind of involved with the same kind of things, but the
Mhm.
feeling of it comes through, even though I didn't have the same situation or the same experiences.
Mhm.
So to being able to write to that degree, to have that kind of universal appeal. Okay, I have to ask you this because this is a weird question. Have you cast this already in your mind when they make it into a movie?
Well, that's funny you should say that because I was just in LA and someone had said they were interested in turning my books into a TV series. So, oh gosh, who did my granddaughters say? Some young actress. I don't know a lot of the younger one. I can picture them in my mind.
Hmm.
And my granddaughter, the 8.5-year-old, was kind of funny. She was trying to pose as Jelly Bean, and she said, "Could I be in it?" And I was like, "Oh, I sort of haven't gotten that far yet." So I don't know. I have an idea in my mind, but I can't say a specific person
Hmm.
because I just don't know enough.
Yeah. Yeah. When you teach writing, I'm assuming you're using some of your own work as examples, but who else do you teach while you're doing that?
Oh, well, I'm retired now, but I always had a curriculum that they would
Hmm.
give me, of course. And in the textbook, it's so funny when I started teaching on the college level and I first looked in it, I'm like, wow, there's a whole unit on Beauty and the Beast. And there's so many versions of that story, which I didn't know before.
Yeah.
It wasn't part of my repertoire. And I loved a lot of those versions. They were fascinating from the one original where she was gonna have to be sacrificed
Yeah.
down to the more modern ones where she's can stick up for herself and be they can learn to be she and the beast can learn to be different but respect one another. And I just learned a lot from those. And I'm trying to think which other, well, I had to teach the Iliad and the Odyssey, and
Mhm.
I just loved those. I had to teach it so the kids and Shakespeare, which at the time when I was being taught those, I didn't really like them. I think my teachers, many of them were wonderful, but
Mhm.
I knew I had to make them more accessible, especially with the
Yeah.
language,
Oh, yeah.
because so much is based on those and there are so many allusions. So I did have a lot of fun with it. I did show some movies that went along with them, and I had to be kind of creative, especially for my not non-college bound
Yeah.
kids. And we made up games, like one had Odysseus's travels, and you could sort of like a Monopoly type of
Yeah.
game, something of that nature.
Stop here, get hit by the island, turn into a pig, whatever, whatever's going on. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. So they got to enjoy it. At
Okay.
least many of them seem to.
Okay, great. Well, obviously, standing up, you shouldn't have any problem with doing book tours. If you stand up in front of a classroom full of young kids and survive, that would be like nothing because they're all come there to see you. That must be fun.
It is fun. Yeah, and I like them to learn. I make it interactive. So I read something, they write something, we read it all out loud, share. So I want to hear me drone on the whole time.
See, a real teacher's hands-on. Absolutely. Great.
Well, it's kind of funny if you just want to hear a quick story.
Yeah.
A lot of well, I got this idea from someone and he had to be kind of brave, but it's a good idea. So I would give they'd have to write an evaluation
Mhm.
of me after each class. Sometimes I did it at the end of a week. And I got a lot of, happily, a lot of positive ones. But this one girl, it was in sixth grade, and this taught me so much. She wrote, and you can think you have these wonderful ideas, but the droning on doesn't work. She wrote, Mrs. Pollack just goes on and on and on. And you only really learn a lot from your negative criticism. And I
Yeah.
was like, and that really changed me because I was like, whoa, better stop that
Well, it worked, obviously. But people who
and
can take
keep it in mind.
criticism and people who can't. Obviously, the professionals are ones who can. So
That's hard. Yeah, that's really tough.
it's for, but I can see that you're already being professional. You've got a second publisher now, and you'll probably be doing a whole lot of this for a long time to come. What,
Hopefully.
oh, yeah, what you talk about the family feedback. Does anybody feed you back and go, that sounds too much like me. I wish you'd change this aspect of it?
Oh, that's kind of funny. No, not so far because my husband's cousin, who's the youngest of four and has three older brothers, she just gets a big kick out of it and she likes it because we were close even though she was 16 years younger than I was when we met. But we always had like a close relationship, and I based certain aspects on that, like her relationships with her brothers at the time.
Yeah.
Everything's always subject to change. I haven't been No, so far criticized and the people who, oh, let's say a principal that I didn't really care for. A lot of people who are teachers have to, when I was taught in the younger grades, he's in there, but I'm sure if he were to read it, wouldn't be too thrilled with the portrait of himself.
Well, we won't, we
Oh,
won't.
and so there was a teacher. I mean, you remember these things vividly when, you were
Yeah.
younger? Oh my God, she was so mean, which back when I was in grade school, you could get away with. Like my
Yeah.
fourth grade teacher was so wonderful. The third grade teacher was so mean. And in the lunchroom, like she called me out in front of like the whole, because she thought I was talking when you weren't supposed to be talking, all that, she's in there.
Yeah. Well, I recognize that scene actually from the book.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I know what you're talking about.
It was
Obviously,
harsh.
you have the ability to resonate, and as we all know, with great power comes great responsibility. And
Mhm.
I feel you're taking that seriously. You're really, really thinking about what you're doing.
I do try. Yeah. I try to gear it to those ages.
Is there anything we've not touched on you want to make sure that our listeners know about?
Um,
Blogs, email, websites.
you can really get everything on my website, which is amypollack.com.
Mhm.
And the easiest way, and that has all my information about me, my writing, my books, how to order the Adventures of Jelly Bean and the Further Adventures of Jelly Bean. And my next one hopefully won't take too long. It's in the publisher's hands.
Okay.
So hopefully that won't take too long to come out. And if you like them, you could write even one sentence, something positive on Amazon.
I love that. I love that. And we think our listeners will probably do that same. I want to thank you so much. You've been very generous with your time today with us,
Oh,
and you've been very generous with your time in providing some really fine books for young kids. I really appreciate
uh,
that.
thank you, Roger.
All right. I wish you all the best, and until then, thanks
Mm,
for being with us.
and thanks. Same to you. Thank you.